If you wanted to kill a vampire, luring it into sunlight would be a safe bet. After all, we all know what happened when Count Orlok was struck by sunlight in Nosferatu, and we all saw Kiefer Sutherland's arm burst into flames in The Lost Boys. But are vampires actually deathly allergic to sunlight, or is this just another myth invented by pop culture? Gotta hurry. It's almost dawn. We learn that vampires are killed by sunlight in this scene from the original Nosferatu made by F.W. Murnau in 1922. In the scene, Ellen sacrifices herself to Orlok to distract him from the coming dawn. When the sound of a rooster is heard outside, Orlok realizes too late that he's been duped. When he sees the sun through an open window, he vanishes into thin air. Now, it's not explained in the film why sunlight is fatal, it just kind of is. However, director Robert Eggers offers some insight during an interview following the 2024 remake of the classic vampire flick. He says it's not the sunlight that kills Orlok, but the purity of the new dawn, the symbolic rising of new life that ultimately brings the lifeless, soulless vampire to his demise. Keep in mind, though, that this is a contemporary interpretation of a century-old film, and we don't know if this interpretation was also held by Murnau over 100 years ago. What we do know is that the original Nosferatu was an unauthorized copy of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, and the concept of sunlight being fatal to a vampire was invented by Murnau to distinguish his monster from Stoker's. Though he probably should have done a bit more to distinguish his monster, because he was ultimately sued by the Stoker estate and ordered to destroy all existing copies of the film. Fortunately, some copies did survive, leaving us with this classic scene. But even though the fatal sun was an invention of Murnau, the idea that a vampire is vulnerable to sunlight wasn't new at the time. Much like the truth is to today's politicians, the sun was merely an inconvenience, a nuisance that weakened vampires and took away some or all of their supernatural powers. In Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula is weakened by sunlight and loses his shape-shifting abilities. In Carmilla, an 1872 novella by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, Carmilla becomes somewhat lethargic during the day, but otherwise has no issues with the sun. In The Vampire, a piece of short fiction written by John William Polidori in 1819, Lord Ruthven can freely walk in the sunlight and isn't even notably weakened. Okay, so we know what books have to say about vampires and sunlight, but what about the literal thousands of years of vampire folklore that goes all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamian and Sumerian civilizations? As it turns out, not a whole lot, actually. See, much like early 19th century literature, vampires in early folklore are simply described as nocturnal, and like any nocturnal creature, they prefer to be active at night, usually to hunt unsuspecting prey. Except in this case, we're talking about human prey. But much like a possum doesn't spontaneously combust into flames and ash if it happens to be moving around during the day, neither would a vampire. This began to change, however, during the Middle Ages with the spread of Christianity. The vampires, I mean. Possums didn't explode back then either. God, could you imagine? During European Christianization in the 1st century AD, the church began to adapt pagan beliefs to fit Christian frameworks. This provided a smoother transition for new Christian converts and was the preferred method of handling paganism, as it was more effective than outright abolishment. As a result, Christianity began to depict folk monsters like vampires as agents of Satan. And because Christian ideology tends to associate darkness with the devil and light, particularly sunlight, with Jesus Christ, the notion that vampires were therefore weak to sunlight was born. Still got time. In today's pop culture, there's really no universal rule concerning the effect sunlight has on a vampire. While sunlight is portrayed as fatal in films like Interview with the Vampire, The Lost Boys, John Carpenter's Vampires, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the Hammer films Dracula starring Christopher Lee, others, including Twilight, Dark Shadows, and the Blade franchise, depict vampires as being only slightly vulnerable or even entirely unaffected by sunlight. Except in Blade. In Blade, Wesley Snipes is a day walker while other vampires die in the sun. God, I love that movie. Nevertheless, the idea that vampires are killed by sunlight has taken on an almost Mandela effect in popular culture. Ask any normie and they'll probably tell you that sunlight kills vampires. But now, you know better. So if you do find yourself in need of killing a vampire, maybe don't rely on the sun, maybe just rely on the good old-fashioned wooden stake. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe and consider following my Twitch channel where we play all kinds of monster-related games every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until next time, happy hunting. What is that? No, it can't be. There's no way. This watch is broken. Shh. No!